Dragon Ball Fusion World is a very skill-intensive game, one of the card games that I actually associate more to chess than anything else. In that regard, there are a lot of opportunities for you to level up your gameplay, and with that, here are 3 tips to make you better at Dragon Ball Fusion World. The first tip I want to kick off with, and arguably one of the most important I think is kind of to understand and level up your gameplay, is that it is okay to not attack. Dragon Ball does a really good job of giving you a lot of incentives to want to attack. Your leaders draw cards, a lot of battle cards that you attack with draw cards or can act as removal or something of the sort. But there are a lot of opportunities here where not attacking is to your benefit more so to the benefit of your opponent. A lot of leaders play extremely well on their backside as opposed to their front side, Frieza being one of them. Frieza loves to be on his backside and tries to awaken as quickly as possible. There are a lot of opportunities as a deck that you have then to not right away poke into him, force him to have to take turns to trigger some self-awakening abilities, and then force into the leader. So in that sequencing, while you are still slowing yourself down, you are still putting yourself in an advantageous ability because the Frieza deck is kind of stunned there and trying to slowly rack up enough resources to be able to do what it wants to do. So in that way, you are very much incentivized to gauge what your opponent wants to do and how you can best play around that. And oftentimes it is a-okay to not attack. If your opponent gives you the opportunity to attack because they play a battle card attack into you, then yes, of course, attack into the battle card, it clears a card on there and you draw a card, and then you never give your opponent additional card by not attacking into their leader. But if that's not the scenario and you are the slower deck or the deck that would do better the more energy you have or preventing your opponent from going into their awakened side, then hey, don't attack, it's perfectly okay. If you are attacking though, aim to combo in magic numbers. This is a kind of idea that was pulled from Universe X's videos. You guys are definitely want to go check him out on that. It's about One Piece, but specifically it definitely applies to Dragon Ball. And it's the notion that you want to be aware what your opponent can combo with to kind of get as much advantage out of their hand as possible. So in Dragon Ball, outside of super combos that can combo for 20k, like we have the Chilai here, for the most part, cards cap out at comboing for 10k. So if I'm attacking into an awakened leader, I want to try and attack for 30k, let's say, because then no matter what, I know I'm forcing at least 2 cards in hand or a super combo, which is really, really powerful because the attacker gets the advantage in this game, which means if we're both at the same number, we have to deal the same, it still deals damage. So in that regard, I swing for 30k, my opponent needs to get to above 30k, which because this game is very 5k centric, then it is at 35. So if I hit him for that number, he's gonna have to dump a 10. I still deal damage, so he's gonna have to dump another 5. If he only has 5, he needs to dump 3 cards, or he needs to dump one of his 4 super combos, which are extremely valuable. And in that sense, you really want to optimize for hand advantage. And that's very much the crux of Dragon Ball Fusion World. How can I get cards out of my opponent's hand? How's he trying to get cards out of my hand? How can I get the most value out of my cards? In that sense, just always be aware of what your opponent's combo patterns may be and going from there. If my opponent has 3 cards in hand, super combos aside, because they kind of ruin the combat math a little bit, or the same thing with they have the energy up. Let's say they do not have any energy standing and they have 3 cards in hand. And in that regard, I know that I need to swing in for about 60 if I want to almost guarantee that damage. Once you get super combos into the mix, you know that they're worth 20 each, which means he has an additional 60k combo, which means I need to swing in for 80. These are the kind of things that you just kind of need to keep in mind, and it will definitely help you in your strategizing and pushing in for more damage. And then to close out our third tip, and by far the most important tip though, is mastering sequencing. The game is very open board state oriented, which means at any point in time, you can consistently go into an attack, jump back into your main phase, do some actions. And in that regard, there's a few components you need to think about. 1, give your opponent as little information as possible. Here, my example is that I have a board of my leader and Son Gohan, and I have 5 energy open. I want to make sure that I optimize for my opponent not knowing what I'm going to do. If I haven't played out my energy yet, there's so many things I could have. I could have, for example, this double strike Goku in my hand. I could have another Gohan. I could have, I don't know, 3 20Ks or something like that I want to play out of my hand this turn. All of those things are things that my opponent's going to have to consider, but if I just dump out my hand and then start attacking, you are giving him that free information. So here, the sequencing would be something along the lines of swing with Son Goku, get a card draw. If my opponent's at 2 life, swing with Gohan, then they have to dump an additional card out of hand because they don't want to lose a life from crit. And if they're at 2 life, well then now I'm in a great position to play out Son Gohan after having done all of that, forced additional cards out of my opponent and go from there. Alternatively, if I don't do that and I play the Son Goku right off rip, now my opponent knows that I'm swinging in with a double striker before I really forced any cards out of his hand. So if I swing with my leader, he's probably just going to take the damage because he knows that he's going to have to protect against a big Son Goku afterwards. And that 1 card protecting against that is going to do much better than not. Also, if my opponent can't out the damage, saying I go into my Son Goku, he prevents that or whatever he takes and goes down to 1. Now I know that I'm not in a position where I have to play my Son Goku to win, and I can actually attack my Son Gohan, apply pressure there, or utilize my hand in a different way. So in that regard, sequencing is huge because you're always compensating for giving your opponent as little information as possible. Additionally, you just gotta manage the board, right? If my opponent has a blocker, he knows that he's probably better off blocking like a double strike Goku or something like that, assuming he can live from his on play. That's with that assumption in mind. So in that regard, want to take away his ability to be able to make that informed decision. Information is power. So in that regard, giving your opponent as little of that is huge. Or sequencing so that you can set yourself up for the double strike. If your opponent is at 3 life, set up in a way where maybe your Son Gohan gets in, he's forced to take that damage, goes down to 2, and now you can go to Son Goku and then deal the double strike damage. And in that regard, you gave your opponent 1 less card. Again, we want to optimize both for less information and to minimize the amount of card advantage our opponent has to deal with what we're about to do. And if you put yourself in that headspace of what will my opponent like to do most here, and then reverse engineer that to making the plays and sequences that force them out of those positions, you can give yourself so many advantages and put yourself in a position to be able to win a lot more games. Those are the first few tips that I personally go into at the start of any new Fusion World set to kind of understand what cards are doing, what my opponent wants to do, and give myself the best chance at winning. But if you guys have any other tips and tricks, let me know in the comments down below, and I will be doing more thorough breakdowns. So if you want a specific breakdown on a leader or a strategy, once the release of the client comes out and we get the full set, we're almost a few cards away from being able to know everything with the set. We'll be doing that most definitely, so you guys want to hit the subscribe button, not miss any of that. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one.